The air in the pre-flight briefing room was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the low hum of masculine confidence. It was a world Captain Marcus Thorne had dominated for 30 years. He stood like a monument to his own career, his chest puffed out, his uniform crisp, his silver hair a crown of authority. He scanned the faces of his crew for the long-haul flight to Narita aboard the colossal cargo freighter. The Titan, his eyes, accustomed to seeing deference, settled on the last person to enter the room. First Officer Anya Sharma. She was small in stature, with a quiet face that seemed serene for the pressures of a cockpit. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple, severe bun, and her uniform, though perfectly neat, looked borrowed, as if it belonged to someone larger, someone more substantial. Thorne's lip curled in a barely concealed sneer. He turned to his flight engineer, a portly man named Greg, and spoke in a stage whisper that was designed to carry. "Look what they've sent us now. Did we get a bring your daughter to work day memo that I missed?" Laughter, sycophantic and cheap, rippled through Thorne's loyalists. Anya heard it. Of course she heard it. The heat of it pricked at her ears, but her expression remained a placid lake. She took her seat, her movements economical and precise, and opened her flight plan folder. Her focus was a shield, forged through years of similar greetings of dismissive glances and condescending tones. She knew what they saw, a girl playing dress-up in a man's world. They could not see the thousands of hours logged in roaring simulators, the encyclopedic knowledge of hydraulic systems and emergency protocols that she recited in her sleep, the almost spiritual connection she felt with the physics of flight. They only saw the surface, and the surface, two men like Thorne, was everything. If you are inspired by stories where true worth shines through, please consider subscribing. Your support helps us share more tales of quiet strength. The briefing continued, with Thorne pontificating about his past heroic feats in storms over the Atlantic, his voice booming with self-regard. He gestured grandly at the weather charts, dismissing the amber warnings over the Siberian corridor. "A bit of chop," he declared, waving a dismissive hand. "Nothing the Titan can't handle. We'll punch right through it." Anya made a small note in her margin, a question about a potential deviation to a more southerly route. When Thorne asked for questions, she kept her silence. She had learned long ago that her questions were not heard as inquiries, but as challenges. On the tarmac, walking towards the behemoth aircraft, Thorne fell into step beside her. The Titan loomed over them, a giant of metal and wire, its engines vast dark caverns. "Listen, Sharma," he said, his voice dripping with false paternalism. "I'll handle the takeoff and landing. You just keep the coffee coming and don't touch anything important unless I tell you to. Understand?" He didn't wait for an answer, clapping her on the shoulder with a force that was meant to be friendly, but felt like an assertion of dominance. Anya simply nodded, her gaze fixed on the cockpit window high above them. It looked like the eye of a sleeping god. Inside, the cockpit was a cathedral of technology. Thorne settled into the left-hand seat with the sigh of a king ascending his throne. Anya began her pre-flight checks, her fingers dancing over the instrument panel, a flurry of silent expert movements. She cross-referenced fuel loads, checked hydraulic pressures, and tested the flap actuators. Each switch she flipped, each light that blinked green in response, was a small, private conversation between her and the machine. Thorne watched her with an air of bored amusement. "Don't wear yourself out, kid," he drawled, leaning back. "It's a big, beautiful bird. Practically flies itself." He was wrong. No plane truly flew itself. They were complex, temperamental beasts that demanded respect, a respect Thorne had long since replaced with arrogance. Anya felt a low, resonant thrum through the floor plates. It was the auxiliary power unit coming to life, the first heartbeat of the giant. She felt it not in her ears, but in her bones. For her, this was not just a job, it was a calling. And today that calling would be tested in ways no one in that room could possibly imagine. The ascent was smooth, a powerful, graceful climb through the thin morning clouds. Below them, the world shrank into a patchwork of greens and browns. For the first few hours, the Titan lived up to its reputation, a stable giant cruising at 40,000 feet. Captain Thorne was in his element, regaling the flight engineer with another story about his glory days, his laughter echoing in the confined space of the cockpit. Anya, relegated to the role of observer, monitored the systems with unwavering focus. Her gaze swept in a constant, disciplined pattern across the myriad of dials and digital readouts. She noticed a flicker first, a tiny, almost imperceptible fluctuation in the pressure reading for the secondary hydraulic system. It was like a single skipped heartbeat in an otherwise healthy rhythm. She logged it, her pen making a neat, precise entry. Thorne, catching her movement, scoffed, seeing ghosts, first officer. This machine is state-of-the-art, perfect, built by the best. Anya didn't reply. She simply continued her watch, the flicker a seed of unease planted in her mind. An hour. Later, the first sign of real trouble appeared on the weather radar. The bit of chop Thorne had so arrogantly dismissed had metastasized. It was now a vast, swirling vortex of angry red and purple. A supercell of monstrous proportions looming directly in their flight path. It wasn't just a storm. It was a meteorological leviathan. "Look at that, Greg," the flight engineer muttered, his jovial tone gone. "She's angrier than the forecast predicted." Thorne squinted at the screen. For the first time, a flicker of something other than self-satisfaction crossed his face. It was annoyance, as if the weather itself had dared to defy him personally. "We're not going around," he stated, his jaw set. "It'll add 3 hours, too. The flight, the company will have my hide. We'll punch through. Buckle up," Anya spoke, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through Thorne's bravado. "Captain, I recommend an immediate 10-degree course correction to the south. We can skirt the worst of it. The fuel cost is negligible compared to the structural stress." Thorne turned to her, his eyes blazing with indignation. It was the challenge he had been waiting for. "Are you questioning my command, First Officer? I have flown through typhoons that would make this little squall look like a spring shower. I know this aircraft. I know the sky. We fly the route as planned." His word was final, a hammer blow of authority. Anya met his gaze for a moment, her own eyes unreadable, and then she gave a single curt nod. She had done her duty by advising him. The failure to listen was his alone. They flew on, straight towards the churning wall of black cloud. The calm of the stratosphere gave way to a violent, sickening turbulence. The Titan, which had felt so solid just moments before, began to protest. It groaned and shuddered, buffeted by winds that slammed into it like invisible fists. Inside the cockpit, coffee sloshed from cups and loose items rattled in their compartments. A chorus of alarms began to sing their terrifying song. First, a soft chime for the turbulence. Then a harsher, more insistent warning. The pressure in. The secondary hydraulic system, the one Anya had been watching, plummeted. A bright amber light flashed on the console. Greg swore under his breath. "We've lost secondary hydraulics, Captain." Thorne's knuckles were white on the yoke. He was fighting the plane, his inputs jerky and aggressive. "It's fine, the primary system is more than enough," he yelled over the roar of the wind. But the sky wasn't done with them. A brilliant, blinding flash of blue-white light enveloped. The aircraft followed an instant later by a deafening crack that sounded like the sky itself had split open. A direct lightning strike. The cockpit lights flickered and died, plunging them into a momentary, terrifying darkness before the emergency power kicked in, bathing the panel in a ghostly red glow. And with the red light came the siren, piercing, soul-shattering wail. That signified only one thing: catastrophic failure. The primary hydraulic system was gone. The Titan was now a glider, made of 400 tons of dead weight, falling through the heart of a raging storm. The siren was a scream that filled every inch of the cockpit, a sound of pure, mechanical terror. The plane bucked and plunged, no longer an aircraft, but a metal coffin at the mercy of the tempest. "What's happening?" Thorne roared, his voice cracking, the veneer of his legendary calm shattered into 1,000 pieces. He wrestled with the control yoke, but it was useless, a dead weight in his hands. The plane wasn't responding. The red emergency lights cast demonic shadows on his face, revealing a man utterly lost, his confidence stripped away to reveal raw, primal fear. "We've lost all hydraulics. All of them," Greg yelled, his hands flying over his own console, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. "We have no control surfaces. We're falling." From the communications panel, a voice, tinny and distant, crackled through the chaos. It was air traffic control. "Titan, do you copy? We are showing you in a rapid, uncontrolled descent. What is your status, over?" Thorne grabbed the microphone, his hand trembling. "Mayday, mayday, mayday, Titan. We've had a catastrophic failure. We're going down." His voice was a panicked shriek. In that moment of absolute chaos, a new sound emerged. It was not an alarm. It was a voice, quiet, level, and imbued with an impossible calm. "My controls." It was Anya. Thorne stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Her face was a mask of intense concentration, her eyes no longer serene, but burning with a fierce, brilliant light. She was looking at the world outside the cockpit, at the swirling vortex of cloud and rain, reading it, understanding it. "I have the controls," she repeated, her voice cutting through his panic like a surgeon's scalpel. There was no room for argument, and her tone was an authority far more profound than the rank on Thorne's shoulders. Dazed, he released his death grip on the yoke. Anya's hands moved with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. With the hydraulics gone, the traditional controls were useless, but she wasn't using them. Her left hand went to the engine thrust levers, her right to the rudder trim wheel. She was flying the plane by differential thrust and manual trim, a technique that was theoretically possible but considered by most pilots to be a desperate, suicidal last resort. It was like trying to paint a masterpiece with a hammer and a rock. Under her touch, the plane's terrifying plunge began to shallow. She fed power to the outer engines while easing it from the inner ones, using the raw force of the jets to steer the wounded giant. The sickening lurching began to subside, replaced by a controlled, albeit heavy, descent. She was not fighting the storm. She was dancing with it, using its own energy to guide her. "Greg," she said, her voice never rising, "kill the siren. Tell me our airspeed and altitude every 5 seconds. And get me a direct line to the lead engineer at the nearest maintenance base. Now." The command galvanized the flight engineer out of his fear-induced paralysis. He fumbled with the switches, silencing the maddening wail. The relative quiet was almost as shocking as the noise had been. "Airspeed, 450 knots. Altitude, 22,000 feet. Greg reported, his voice shaky but steadying. Anya's mind was a supercomputer. She was calculating drag, wind, shear, and fuel burn, all while wrestling the aircraft into a semblance of stability. "Mayday call canceled," she said into the radio, her voice broadcasting an unbelievable sense of control. "Titan is experiencing total hydraulic failure. We are maintaining partial control via differential thrust, requesting immediate vectors to the nearest suitable runway. We will need the longest one you have." There was a stunned silence from the other end. The controller, a veteran named David Chen, sitting in a quiet, climate-controlled room, hundreds of miles away, stared at his screen. He'd been about to list the Titan as lost. "Titan, ... confirm you are flying the aircraft." "Affirmative," Anya replied. "Now, those vectors." David Chen looked at the map. The nearest airport was a remote airbase, carved into the side of a mountain range, notorious for its brutal crosswinds and unforgivingly short runway. It was a pilot's nightmare, even in perfect conditions. For a crippled superfreighter with no control surfaces, it was a death sentence. "Titan," he said, his own voice heavy with dread, "the only option is Kinjira Air Base. I have to advise you. The weather there is severe. Crosswinds are gusting to 50 knots across the runway." He heard no fear in the reply, only resolve. "We'll take it," Anya said. "Notify emergency services. Tell them we are coming in heavy, fast, and with no way to slow down normally." The co-pilot's seat, Marcus Thorne, sat frozen, a silent, broken statue. He was watching a miracle and a nightmare unfold. He was watching a pilot he had dismissed as a child perform an act of airmanship that would be written into legend. If they somehow managed to survive, The descent from the heavens was a controlled fall, a 40-minute ballet of terror and grace. On the ground, at the remote and storm-lashed Kendra Air Base, chaos had been orchestrated into a symphony of preparedness. A dozen fire trucks and ambulances lined the runway, their red and white lights cutting through the driving rain, painting the wet tarmac in strokes of urgent pulsing color. In the control tower, David Chen was a statue of focus. His world shrunk to the single blinking dot on his radar screen and the impossibly calm voice in his headset. He had cleared all other air traffic for 100 miles. The sky belonged to the Titan alone. Every controller, every off-duty pilot, every member of the ground crew who could find a screen was watching, their faces a mixture of awe and dread. They had heard the situation report. A 400-ton freighter, no hydraulics, attempting a landing in a gale-force crosswind. It wasn't flying, it was a guided missile. "You're doing good, Titan," David said, his voice a low, steady anchor. In the storm, 5 miles out, runways in sight. Through the cockpit window, a hellish scene unfolded. The runway lights were barely visible, smeared by the sheets of rain that battered the windscreen. The wind howled, a physical force that slammed into the side of the aircraft, trying to shove it off course. The plane crabbed sideways, its nose pointed 30 degrees away from the runway, the only way Anya could counteract the ferocious crosswind. Beside her, Thorn was a ghost. The arrogant captain was gone, replaced by a man hollowed out by the realization of his own inadequacy. He watched Anya's hands, which never stopped moving. They flew between the 4 thrust levers, making minute-constant adjustments, playing the engines like a complex pipe organ. Her feet worked the rudder pedals, which had only minimal effect, but she used every ounce of pressure they could give. "Gear down," she commanded. Greg flipped the switch. There was a clunk, a shudder, but only 2 of the 3 green lights illuminated. "Right main gear is not indicating down and locked," he shouted. "It's stuck." Anya didn't flinch. There was no time for surprise, no room for despair. "Then we land without it," she stated simply. "David, be advised. We are landing on port side and nose gear only. The right wing will be low. Prepare for a ground loop." A collective gasp went through the control tower. A partial gear landing in this wind, in this aircraft. It was beyond impossible. It was insanity. "Understood, Titan. The field is yours." "Godspeed," David whispered, his professional calm finally cracking. This was the final act. Anya pitched the nose up, a dangerous maneuver that bled off speed, but brought them perilously close to a stall. The stall warning alarm, a frantic rhythmic clacker, began to sound, but she ignored it. She needed to be slow, as slow as she could possibly be. "This is it," she said, more to herself than to the others. The portside wheels touched the tarmac. The impact was violent, a bone-jarring shock that ran through the entire airframe. A terrifying second, the left wing tried to lift, to cartwheel the entire plane over, but Anya was ready. She slammed the 2 left engines into full reverse thrust while keeping the right engines firing forward. The asymmetrical power was a brutal physical force that twisted the plane, fighting its desire to flip. Metal screamed against asphalt. Sparks, brilliant and orange, erupted from the left side landing gear as the tires blew out from the strain. The massive aircraft slewed sideways, a giant wounded beast sliding down the runway in a shower of fire and smoke. The right wing, unsupported by its landing gear, dipped lower and lower. Thorne squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable, catastrophic impact of wingtip on ground. But Anya made one final, desperate move. Now, just before the wingtip could catch and send them spiraling into oblivion, she cut all power. The Titan slid, its momentum finally bleeding away, and with a final groaning shudder, it came to a stop, askew on the runway, surrounded by a halo of smoke and the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles that were now racing towards it. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the cockpit was the ticking of cooling metal and the frantic beat of their own hearts. They were alive. They were on the ground. A wave of relieved, hysterical applause broke out in the distant control tower. David Chen sagged into his chair, dropping his head into his hands, tears of relief tracing paths down his weary face. In the cockpit, Anya finally let go of the controls. Her hands were shaking, the adrenaline finally overwhelming her iron will. She took a single, deep, shuddering breath. Greg was weeping openly, a strange, choked sound of joy and terror. Thorne just stared. He looked at the carnage on the runway, then at the young woman beside him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Now what could he say? He had been a passenger on his own ship, a spectator to his own rescue. The cockpit door was wrenched. Opened by firefighters, they saw the chaos, the smoke, and the shaken captain in the left-hand seat. "Captain, are you okay?" one of them yelled, but Thorne didn't answer. He just pointed a trembling finger at the small, quiet figure in the first officer's seat. "Her," he croaked, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. It was all her. The firefighters, the world, everyone turned to look at Anya Sharma. And in that moment, they didn't see a child playing dress-up. They saw the pilot who had landed the Titan.